Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're digging into a place many of us think we know, Central Park. But here's something, well, astonishing to kick us off. Yeah, get this. When the park was finally finished in 1876, its construction cost, $7.4 million, was actually more than what the U.S. paid for Alaska.
The entire state of Alaska?
The entire state. Just 9 years earlier, that deal was $7.2 million.
Wow. That really puts it in perspective, doesn't it? A park costing more than Alaska.
Exactly. So yeah, Central Park, it's way more than just green space. It's this meticulously designed urban oasis, a real wilderness by design, and, a huge cultural touchstone for New York.
Absolutely. And that's our mission for this deep dive, really, to unpack the story behind it, which is complex, sometimes controversial, and definitely very human.
How it all came together.
Yeah, how this landmark got built, the visionaries involved, the immense challenges, and also how New Yorkers' relationship with their lungs of the city, as they call it, has changed over time.
Okay, so let's rewind. Mid-19th century New York. By the 1840s, the city is just exploding, population booming. It's becoming the biggest city in the Western Hemisphere.
Incredible growth.
But amidst all this industry and growth, there's this huge gap. No major public green space. Can you even imagine that today? Millions of people, just concrete and chaos, nowhere to really breathe.
It sounds pretty grim, actually.
It does. And this need, it wasn't ignored. You had influential people starting to speak up.
Like William Cullen Bryant.
Exactly, the poet and editor. And Andrew Jackson Downing, the landscape architect. They were really pushing for a big public park.
They saw it as essential, right? Not just nice to have.
Totally. They argued that nature wasn't just for the rich. It was vital for everyone's health, their sanity, even for building community spirit, a kind of counterbalance to the city's intensity.
And the vision for the park itself was pretty radical for the time.
How so?
Well, the idea wasn't to preserve some existing pristine nature. It was actually the opposite.
Right. The land they chose was not exactly ideal.
Not at all. It was mostly rocks, swamps, marshland. Really challenging terrain. The whole point was to engineer it, to transform it into this public place for literally all New Yorkers.
A deliberate contrast to the private parks.
Precisely. A direct challenge to places like Gramercy Park, which were gated and only for the wealthy elite. This was meant to be democratic.
But that democratic vision, it came at cost, a human cost.
It did. And we have to talk about that. The land acquisition, mostly through eminent domain, it was controversial even then.
Because people were living there.
Yes. Over 1,600 residents were displaced.
Yeah.
Forced out of their homes. And we really need to focus on Seneca Village here.
Okay.
This was a significant community established back in 1825, mostly black landowners. By 1855, you had about 225 people, 2/3 black, with homes, churches, a school.
A real established community.
Absolutely. And crucially, owning land was tied to voting rights for black men in New York at that time.
Ah, right. There was that property qualification.
Exactly. An 1821 amendment made it harder for black men to vote while removing the property requirement for white men. So 1845, out of maybe 100 black New Yorkers eligible to vote, 10 lived in Seneca Village.
So destroying Seneca Village wasn't just about clearing land for a park.
No, it was much deeper. It struck a blow against black advancement, black property ownership, black political voice. It's a stark reminder that even projects seen as progress can have deeply unequal impacts.
That's a really important and sobering part of the story. So bringing it back to the money side then, that final cost, $7.39 million by 1876.
Which you mentioned, yeah, by $232 million today.
Still staggering. And it was New York State footing that bill, not the federal government.
Right. A massive state investment.
So they have the land, they have the funding. How do they actually design this thing? There was a competition, wasn't there?
There was a big design competition in 1858. 33 entries, I believe.
And the winners were?
Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux with their greensward plan.
Olmsted and Vaux. Names synonymous with the park. What was their core idea?
Their goal was really to create a feeling of escaping the city within the city. A naturalistic landscape, with curved paths instead of straight lines, lots of lush scenery, a sort of pastoral, almost wild feeling. Carefully designed, of course, but meant to feel natural.
And Vaux, he often gets a bit overshadowed by Olmsted, but his role was huge, architecturally speaking.
Immense. Calvert Vaux was the architect partner, British-born. He designed so many of the park's signature features, but always with the idea that the architecture should serve the landscape, not dominate it.
Like Belvedere Castle.
Exactly. And all those bridges and arches, 39 of them, I think,
Huh?
plus over 100 smaller rustic structures, shelters, things like that. His touch is everywhere, beautifully integrated.
And maybe his most famous contribution is Bethesda Terrace.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's widely seen as his masterpiece, the architectural heart of the park, people call it.
It feels almost like a cathedral, but outdoors and secular.
That's a great way to put it, a secular outdoor cathedral. And the level of detail, the iconography designed by Jacob Ray Mold, it was really unprecedented for public art back then.
All those carvings, what do they represent?
So much.
Yeah.
On the piers near the mall entrance, you've got themes like time there's a rooster for day, an owl and bat for night.
Wow.
And along the ramps, the carvings show the four seasons through incredibly detailed fruits, flowers, plants, birds. It's all meant to subtly evoke nature, art, science, love. It's like a visual lesson, accessible to everyone.
A democratic education through art.
Precisely. Though, interestingly, some planned sculptures figures for the seasons and the ages of man, they never actually got built. Budget constraints, perhaps?
And then underneath the terrace, in the arcade, that ceiling.
Ah, the Minton tiles. That's truly unique. Minton tiles were usually for floors back then.
Right.
This arcade ceiling is the only known example in the entire world of Minton tiles being used on a ceiling. It creates this amazing, colorful, kind of glowing effect in that softly lit space. It's spectacular.
It's just incredible. And then you step out into the main plaza, and there's the fountain, Bethesda Fountain.
The center of the center, as Vaux called it.
Dominated by that beautiful statue, the Angel of the Waters.
By Emma Stebbins. And that's significant, too. It was the very first major public sculpture commission in New York City given to a woman artist.
That's fantastic. And the fountain itself, it commemorates something specific, doesn't it?
Yes, the opening of the Croton Aqueduct in 1842. A huge deal for the city, finally bringing in a reliable supply of clean, fresh water. The angel holds a lily, symbolizing that purity.
So much meaning packed into that one spot. But okay, beyond the art and architecture, building this park on that swampy, rocky land, that must have been an engineering nightmare.
Oh, colossal is the word. The scale is hard to wrap your head around. They removed over 20,000 cubic yards of rock and soil.
Okay.
And get this, they moved 5 million cubic feet of earth.
5 million.
Yeah, to put that in perspective, that's comparable to the amount of earth moved for the entire Panama Canal excavation.
You're kidding, for a park.
For a park. And then they had to bring in soil and plant everything. Over 4 million trees, shrubs, and other plants were brought in and planted by hand. It was just an epic undertaking.
Truly epic. It really changes how you see it, knowing what went into just shaping the land.
Absolutely.
So with all that going on, how did Olmsted and Vaux handle integrating this massive park into the bustling city grid? Their traffic planning was pretty clever, wasn't it?
Revolutionary, really. Even back then, they were thinking about how different types of traffic would move through the space.
What did they do?
They came up with this idea of separate spheres, different paths and roads for pedestrians, for horse riders, and later for carriages and cars.
Ah, the sunken roads.
Exactly. The transverse roads are sunk below the park level with bridges over them. So city traffic could cross east-west without interrupting the park experience, without you even really seeing it.
Genius.
And the paths within the park, they aren't exactly straight lines. No, very deliberately curved. Winding paths designed to reveal scenic vistas gradually. And those tight curves, they were partly intended to slow down carriages, basically. Early traffic calming.
Way ahead of their time. So this park, built at great cost, displacing some, designed with such artistry and engineering. It was meant to be for everyone, right? A democratic space.
That was absolutely the ideal. To create a place where New Yorkers from all walks of life could mingle, relax, and sort of repair the social divisions they saw in the city.
And you see that reflected in things like the gates, right? The named gates.
Yeah, that's a fascinating detail. Along the perimeter, especially 59th Street, the gates aren't just numbered. They have names honoring different groups and professions.
Like?
Scholars, artists, artisans, merchants, pioneers, engineers, inventors, warriors. But also, significantly, gates for women, boys, girls, and the Stranger's Gate, explicitly for immigrants.
Acknowledging everyone's role in the city.
Exactly. And very recently, in 2022, a new gate was dedicated, the Gate of the Exonerated.
Wow, near the northern end.
Yes. Honoring those wrongly convicted in the 1989 Central Park jogger case. A really powerful, modern layer of meaning added to that system.
It is powerful. And inside the park, the sculptures, too, they kind of reflected the city's diversity.
They did. It became a sort of outdoor gallery, a democratic education, as you said. Different ethnic communities donated statues of their national heroes, like the German community gifting Schiller, the Irish gifting Thomas More, the Scottish Sir Walter Scott.
So the park literally became a reflection of the city's melting pot.
In many ways, yes. It showed the pride these immigrant groups had in their heritage and their contributions.
But despite this ideal of a democratic space, there was some tension, wasn't there, between how Olmsted envisioned people using the park and how they actually did.
Oh, definitely. Olmsted had, shall we say, strong opinions. He famously wrote that a large part of the people of New York are ignorant of a park and basically need to be trained how to use it properly.
Trained. That sounds a bit elitist.
It does reflect a certain 19th century perspective. There was often a class distinction in how behavior was perceived. Wealthy folks in carriages were generally seen as behaving appropriately,
Whereas
working class people maybe playing ball games or having picnics might be seen as rude or disruptive to the park's intended tranquil atmosphere.
So the rules probably reflected that.
They did initially. The original rules were quite restrictive. No swimming, no fishing, no fireworks, no playing musical instruments without permission.
Music.
Not initially. And they had park keepers, a special police force, to enforce all this, maintaining good morals and good order.
And was the enforcement fair?
Not always, it seems. There's an anecdote from 1887 about park keepers chasing working-class men picking dandelions, which were maybe for salads or wine, but ignoring a clergyman's daughter doing the exact same thing.
So it suggests the rules weren't always applied equally across class lines.
It certainly raises that question, yeah. Whose definition of good order was being enforced?
So if the original vision and rules were kind of strict, how did the park evolve? How did it become more, well, usable for everyday New Yorkers?
Persistence, really.
Yeah.
Working class and immigrant New Yorkers didn't just accept the restrictions. They pushed back. They advocated for a park that actually served their needs.
What kind of changes came about?
Well, eventually things loosened up. Music was allowed, especially on Sundays. Boating became popular. Even beer sales were permitted on Sundays at some point.
Because Sunday was the main day off for many working people.
Exactly. They needed the park to accommodate their lives, not just the lives of the leisure class. So the park did become more inclusive over time, thanks to that public pressure.
But the park's journey wasn't always smooth sailing, right? It had its ups and downs.
Definitely not. By the early 20th century, investment started to drop off, and the park began showing signs of wear. Then the Great Depression hit hard.
And that's when Robert Moses comes into the picture.
Right. As Parks Commissioner from the 1930s, Robert Moses used New Deal funding to launch a massive revitalization. He restored landscapes, cleaned up the lake, built dozens of new playgrounds, created Woolman Rink. He really did bring the park back from a state of neglect in many ways.
But Moses was also controversial.
Very. He had a bulldozer approach, famously. For instance, he cleared a well-loved wooded area, a bird sanctuary actually, to build a tavern on the Green restaurant. So, progress, but sometimes at the cost of the original Olmstedian vision or existing uses.
And then, fast forward a bit, the park faced another major decline.
Yes, by the 1970s, things were looking pretty grim again. New York City was in a major fiscal crisis, leading to huge budget cuts for parks. Staffing plummeted.
And crime became a big issue, or at least a big perception.
It did. Crime rates rose across the city, and the park wasn't immune. But the media portrayal was often sensationalized, sometimes with racial undertones, particularly focusing on areas bordering Harlem and Spanish Harlem.
And that perception played into tragedies like the Central Park 5 case.
Tragically, yes. The wrongful conviction of those 5 Black and Latino teenagers in 1989 highlighted how fear and racial bias could intersect with issues in the park. It was a really low point.
So how did the park turn around from that low point?
That really marks the beginning of the modern era for the park's management. In 1980, a group of citizens founded the Central Park Conservancy.
A private nonprofit.
Exactly, working in partnership with the city. It was a new model, a public-private partnership specifically created to restore the park and manage it day to day, raising private funds to supplement the city's budget.
And the Conservancy is still managing it today?
Yes, they're responsible for the vast majority of the park's upkeep and restoration. They're constantly tackling modern challenges, dealing with drought, erosion, tree diseases, managing invasive species, and just the incredible wear and tear from, well, millions and millions of visitors.
How many visitors are we talking about now?
Over 40 million people visit Central Park every year.
40 million. Wow.
Yeah, it's one of the most visited urban parks in the world. And its impact is just enormous. Culturally, economically.
Economically, how so?
Well, Beyond being a tourist magnet, the park generates over $1 billion in annual economic activity for the city.
A billion.
Roughly, yeah. And think about the real estate surrounding it. The park dramatically boosts property values estimated at over $500 billion combined.
Incredible. And culturally, it's everywhere.
Oh, completely. It's been a backdrop in over 230 movies. It's inspired music, literature, art. It hosts huge events like Shakespeare in the Park, the Philharmonic concerts. It's woven into the fabric of New York life.
So from that almost unbelievable initial cost, more than Alaska,
Right.
and that complicated history, the vision, the displacement, the engineering marvels, the struggles, the comeback, Central Park really is this incredible man-made Arcadian paradise, a testament to civic vision, but also a reflection of the city's constant evolution and challenges.
Absolutely. It's a living entity, not just a static landmark. And I think its story, its constant evolution, really makes you think, doesn't it?
About what specifically?
Well, about that delicate balance between grand urban plans, social justice, and what public space truly means in a city that's always changing, always grappling with inequality. It forces us to ask, how do we make sure these vital lungs of the city really do breathe freely and equally for everyone who relies on them, today and tomorrow?